come to the admin front desk if you're here for the meeting, and I'll set up a laptop or something.
Okay, could you let me know if anyone's there?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Lynette, are you here, Lynette? Your screen is...
I am
Okay.
here. There's a little chaos going on behind me as the window washers finish. So I'll come on, I'll come on camera when they're done. They're just walking out.
Yeah, it looks like they're washing your screen.
Yeah, well, it could use it.
Jeff, Nova's checking the council chamber. She doesn't think anyone's in there, but if there are, she'll have them set up on Zoom.
Okay.
And also, she was asking, and as you all know, about talking about a hybrid format in the future. Maybe meet in the council chambers and then also have hybrid at the next meeting.
Yeah, I assume the council is going to talk about that. If Carrie could correct me, I assume that the council is going to talk about that next month.
Okay.
We'll see where we are. But we can talk about that. I'll make an announcement about it when we get to announcements. So it's
everyone. Yep.
Yeah, so it's 3:30. We'll call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody to the September 15th climate change meeting. We'll note that everybody's here except Bob Hill, and that's kind of halfway here, soon to be all the way here. Is there anybody that would like to address the committee on members that are in the committee's jurisdiction? Anybody in the public? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Jerry Strickland. Let me get my camera set up really quick.
Sorry about going so fast.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to introduce myself. I am just a member of the community, and I'm interested in climate adaptation and resilience, and would love to help or be of assistance in any way possible.
Great. Thank you very much. We have a limited agenda today, but I'm sure Carrie or I or any member of the committee would be happy to talk to you offline. So welcome to the meeting. We'll go next to announcements. So I have just this one announcement that we were just hinting at before. I expect there's a good chance that next month the council will move to move at some point over the course of the next month or two. I'm not sure whether it's going to happen next month. The council will move back to sort of hybrid in-person / hybrid Zoom meetings. So everybody just be prepared. Be prepared to sort of go back to the council chambers. We'll work out, at the very beginning, if anybody even remembers that far, we were at the tables in the middle. I'm not sure that's going to work with what may be coming up, but we'll certainly work with staff to see what we can devise. So seeing no other announcements, we'll move on to our only order of business today, which is to review a draft consultant proposal for the Coastal Engineering and Adaptation Planning Study Project. And I think I'm going to introduce Bob Harari, and I think he's going to introduce Agnes, and we'll let Bob take it away.
Okay. Thank you, council members and members of the Climate Committee. Hopefully you all had a chance to review the agenda report. I'm just going to briefly summarize, hit some of the key points, and turn it over to our, we have two consultants here that have the technical expertise, and that's really the meat of this conversation. So let me just hit a little bit about the background that's kind of outlined in the staff report. As you may know, we have two funded capital improvement projects. One is this, it's called the Sea Level Rise / Coastal Engineering Report. It's funded for $150,000. Basically, it's for sea level rise resilience planning and for coastal resources and infrastructure analysis. So that's the first project. We had another capital improvement project that was funded last fiscal year for $25,000. Because of COVID and staffing shortages at the time, we didn't really pursue it. We rolled it forward into this fiscal year, and there's a lot of benefit to merge it in with this the project that's before you today. It was called the beach sand survey and wall inspections. It was $25,000. So we bundled them together. The beach sand survey was really to determine the rates of sand loss on the beach, and also to do an inspection of the coastal engineering and issues along the shoreline, the armoring of the shoreline, the structures, and that type of thing. Okay, so we have those two funded capital projects, a total of $175,000. Okay, more recently, on August 2nd, the City Council approved our climate action plan and climate adaptation plan. So that's now adopted. And we're moving into the implementation phase. The council, if you recall, the council asked the climate committee to help guide and oversee and implement specific projects along the way. There's going to be many, many projects for many, many years. The first and probably the most preeminent project right now is this, what we'll call the Coastal Engineering Adaptation Planning Study, which is really a combination of the two CIP projects that we talked about. But more specifically, in the Climate Adaptation Plan, Action 3.1.9 talks about a quote, sea level rise coastal vulnerability study. And this is to determine adaptation measures and local coastal program policy options. We're going to be looking at the natural unarmored North Coastal or not North Dunes area, the armored bluffs along Scenic, as well as the unarmed dunes along private properties between 8th and Del Mar, and armored private properties up by Pescadero Canyon. Also looking at phasing adaptation projects based on changing coastal conditions. So all these projects overlap. The real essence of this is what's in the coastal adaptation plan. As you'll see in a moment from the consultants, this is probably not going to get done in one phase at one swoop. This is going to be a process. So we're looking at this point, we're looking at a 3-phase project. Phase 1 is funded using the $175,000 we have from the CIP projects. Phase 2 that perhaps Agnes will touch base on later will be a non-competitive $100,000 grant from the Coastal Commission to fund Phase 2. And we're also looking ahead for Phase 3. We know we're not going to get every aspect done in just 2 phases, but Phase 3 at this point, it's not funded. There's no cost estimate at this point. It's just basically a list of what needs to be done even after we're done with the first 2 phases. Okay, so that's kind of a background, some background of the projects. So how do we get to select these consultants? In April, we requested a statement of qualifications from consultants. We advertised everywhere from San Jose to Sacramento to San Luis Obispo. We got a number of statement of qualification for consultants for all kinds of different expertise, actually 14 different service areas. The first category we looked at towards hiring a consultant to do this project was coastal engineering and geotechnical engineering services. We did have a selection committee, although we only had one SOQ that was submitted. Fortunately, it was submitted by Haro Kasunich and Associates. Moses Caprell is here. He'll be making a presentation shortly. Extremely well qualified, have done very similar projects. So even though we've got one SOQ, we hit the nail on the head. It's just the right firm for this job. When Agnes and I initially met with Moses to talk about this project, he was the first to admit that while he was excited about the project and certainly capable of doing the engineering and the cost estimating and the structural analysis or the geotechnical analysis, he doesn't have the expertise in his firm to do all of these services. It's a much broader scope. So he suggested that we bring on an environmental firm and a specialist with climate adaptation planning. So then I believe it was Agnes and I that went through 9 statement of qualifications we received for environmental engineering service, or I'm sorry, for environmental services. Through that process, we selected EMC planning group. And when we met with them, they had a sub-consultant listed on their statement of qualifications. They're called Integral Consulting. And Matt Jameson is here. He's represented Integral today. He's substituting for David Ravel, who is, I don't know, hiding. I'm not sure where he is today, but he's just not here. He wasn't able to make it. But anyway, so we met with as a team, and city staff was saying, hey, the three firms, can you guys all merge together rather than the city getting caught in between trying to manage three different firms and trying to coordinate this very integral project, but there's a lot of issues here. So they agreed to it. They agreed to team up as one firm. They proposed that EMC Planning would be the lead firm that the city would contract with once this committee has reviewed their scope of work. Even though EMC's role in phases 1 and 2 is relatively minor, looking down ahead into phase 3 and beyond, EMC's role would be much greater. But they would be our prime consultant, kind of oversee our job of working with city staff and working with the climate committee and working with the two technical experts, Integral and Harold Kusunich. So that's kind of how we got to this point. Okay, so then this is not attached to the report was a draft proposal. This is not the first proposal. I think it's the fourth go around. So it was reviewed, it was scrutinized. We got it to be within budget to the penny. We recognize that it's a long-term project. It's pretty technical. And what we tried to really do is get tangible deliverables at the end of each primary task for both phases. We didn't just want to have a report sit on the shelf without any kind of feedback or presentations to the climate committee. So we kind of parceled it out so that we would have tangible deliverables for each step of the way. And so today, I'll be turning this over to Moses and Matt to make more of a technical presentation on what they're proposing to do in phases 1 and 2, a little brief outline on phase 3. And then at the end of that, we're looking for the committee, we're looking for feedback. What can we do to fine tune the scope of work? I did want to say we're not here to negotiate fees. If the fees need to be negotiated, city staff and the consultants will do that offline. This is not the right forum for that. But if the scope of work is not quite right, or we need to do something else, or maybe a deliverable is not quite what we want, now's the time to speak up. We'd be happy to work with the consultants to make some fine tunings. And depending on how we end today's discussion, if there's a lot of comments or the committee wants to see this another round, we'll come back at the next possible opportunity, present it again with an update of what we fine tuned. And that's one option. The other option is if the comments are relatively minor or it's good just as proposed, then we're going to wrap this up. We're going to convert the proposal into a professional services agreement or contract, take that to the city council the next opportunity, award a contract and get going. And then you would see the consultants, of course, as the individual tasks are completed and they present results of the specific tasks. So hopefully that's clear. And with that, I'll be quiet and I'll turn it over. I believe Moses going first. Over to you, Moses.
Okay, I'll go ahead and, by the way, thank you for the introduction, Bob. That was great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay with everyone, or Matt's already jumping in doing it.
Yeah, Moses, I'm going to share my screen if that's all right. I can control the presentation from my end.
That's excellent. So our team, as Bob just described, is comprised of Integral, which is coastal scientists and adaptation consultants. EMC, they are planning consultants, environmental consultants, and Haro Kusunich and Associates, that's the firm I'm with, and we're coastal and geotechnical engineering consultants. A couple key members of our team, Dave Ravel and Polaris Kinnison, are not here today, but they will be working closely with city personnel on this project. Next slide.
You see it, Moses?
I can. Okay.
Do you want me to pick this one up, Moses?
I got it. I'm sorry. Okay. So the team members, as we just described, are EMC and Integral and Haro Kusunich and Associates. These are some of our examples of our projects we've done together, some of them, and some of them separate from each other. Integral Consulting has teamed up with us to do the Stanford Hopkins Marine Station. We did an adaptation and vulnerability study for that particular site. We also teamed up with Integral to do the West Cliff Drive adaptation and management plan for the city of Santa Cruz. And I know EMC and Integral has done the City of Marina and City of Monterey adaptation studies as well. Next slide. Thank you. So our scope of work for this project is split into 2 phases, each outlined with several tasks on page 5 of the city staff report. Phase 1 is coastal engineering and hazard assessment. This is the identification of vulnerabilities to the city improvements. Phase 2, hazard policy review and revisions, outreach and adaptation pathway development. In other words, this is a roadmap to adapting to the effects of increased sea level rise. Next slide. Phase 1, Task 1, Coastal Engineering Evaluation. For this task, we will inventory and assess the existing backshore armoring along Carmel Beach from Pescadero Creek to Frank Lloyd Wright House. Using engineering judgment, we will estimate the remaining life of the armoring with and without future repairs. Our findings will be summarized in a technical memo with an attached table. These pictures shown on the slide are similar types of assessments being done for the Lovers Point Pier, and a graphical presentation of an evaluation we did of all the public armoring along West Cliff Drive between Cowles Beach and Natural Bridges for the city of Santa Cruz. Next slide.
Yeah, I'll take this one, Moses.
Thank you.
So task 2 will involve the shoreline and beach erosion analysis. What this involves is a historical change analysis, looking at the changes in the beach along Carmel Beach, both between seasons and also between years. As we all know, the beach changes quite significantly between the summer and the winter. We're really fortunate. There's a lot of both historical aerials and also beach transects that have been conducted in the past. So we've got a wealth of information to draw on. What you can see here, this is an assessment we did of historical erosion in Half Moon Bay on the left, looking at the both toe and top of the bluff and cliff there and the recession over time. So what we do here is we will geo-reference or rectify historical photos, compare them, and then we, from that, get some distances and areas that have been lost over time. We also use other imagery that we can get, so whether that be surveys or even photographs that provide a really good reference for calibration for future modeling events.
Okay, phase 1, task 3 is shoreline and beach exposure modeling. For this task, we will estimate future beach scour and bluff recession. To accomplish this, we consider historic retreat, use accurate geomorphology and stability analysis to project future retreat at select points in time, for example, in 50 years or 100 years, or at select sea level rise events. The results of this work will estimate the vertical and horizontal locations of the beach and bluff top at select periods in the future. Next slide.
So in addition to modeling of erosion, we also look at modeling of other coastal hazards. Two of the ones that are most important here would be storm wave flooding and also tidal. So as sea levels rise, you'll have increasing effects of, say, king tides coming up and affecting portions of the beach and the community. So that modeling process is multifaceted and phased. So we take offshore waves from this wave model you see on the left. This is coming out of a SWAN model. This is showing significant wave height and direction. And then we take those offshore waves and project those onto shore using some shoreline transects. You see that in the wave run-up modeling in the center along those transects. And from those, we can project future sea level rise and determine extents of storm wave flooding during various types of storm events, say once a year type of event, a once in 10 year, once 100 year type of an event. And then we map those flood extents into a map. We then overlay those hazard extents with assets that the community may be concerned about, whether that be transportation or land use or recreational facilities on the beach, things of that nature. And then we summarize those in a series of maps and sector profiles, as we call them. You see this on the left here. This is for the community of Carpinteria in Santa Barbara, where we broke down by every single major sector that the community is concerned about. And over time, essentially what all these various coastal hazards, how they could impact the community. You can see here these tables and charts indicating areas, and sometimes it's something financial, like amount of damage. And also we list potential adaptation strategies. You can see here on the right, this is an assessment we did for Seabright Beach in the city of Santa Cruz. These are the potential locations where various types of adaptation strategies could be implemented.
Phase 2, Task 1, Policy Review and Revised Hazard Policies. In this phase, the engineering and science in this phase, the engineering and science from Phase 1 is utilized for planning and policy purposes. Policy recommendations for sea level rise and coastal hazard adaptations, identification of triggers and thresholds. Triggers are significant changes in the environment, such as sea level rising, increasing by 2 feet, or a bluff top retreating by, say, 15 feet horizontally. Thresholds are, for example, 3 feet of sea level rise expects outcome X, damage to a parking lot or loss of a lane on scenic road. So the idea of triggers and thresholds is to avoid emergencies and give lead time for advanced planning. We also do recommendations for LCP updates, which is the local coastal program. Next slide.
So our team has a wealth of experience in leading public outreach and engagement events, both in person and also online and virtually. We've produced story maps and led things during the shutdown period. What you see here on the left is a public and outreach engagement event that we led for the city of Santa Cruz, looking at West Cliff Drive. And you can see one of our team members there on the right and members of the public talking about various strategies that they would prefer. So this is work that follows the initial vulnerability assessment and identification of sort of preliminary adaptation strategies. And this is where we have time to solicit public feedback and get ideas from, say, technical working group members and others on sort of preferred strategies. And we can put this together in numerous ways to express it. You see here on the right, these are maps and graphics that we use to illustrate what these potential adaptation strategies could look like, both in the form of sort of profile or map or other type of illustration. Here's a little bit more of a complex example, but a good example nonetheless of what an adaptation pathway could look like. So as we look into Phase 2, Task 3, this is adaptation pathway development. This will take the form of maps, of graphics, and also tables and a technical report outlining what these adaptation strategies could look like as they phase over time. So this is a little bit of a like choose your own adventure type of thing, where what you see here on the left, this is a map of an area near Pescadero on the south coast of San Mateo County. And you can see strategies for Highway 1 as it faces erosion. There are strategies involving natural or nature-based solutions, armoring or realignment solutions, where those realignments or armoring and nature-based solutions could be located and what they would look like. And then on the right, sort of corresponding with that would be, over time, you'd see from the near term, midterm, long term, what strategies you could implement, how long their efficacy would be, other considerations, what the triggers would be to consider that particular strategy, and sort of what the trade-offs would be. So you can see habitat and recreation, costs, but there's all kinds of other trade-offs too.
Phase 3 is sort of a to be determined. Based on the outcomes of Phase 1 and 2, we will identify future tasks. Some of these may include, but are not limited to, socioeconomic and fiscal impact analysis, a rigorous geotechnical and coastal engineering investigation, and LCP updates, which is the local coastal program. We are here to provide ongoing support on an as-needed basis to the city and staff throughout the completion of this project. So we're not going to do Phase 1 and 2 and leave you guys hanging. Next slide, please. So our schedule for Phase 1 and 2 of this project is 18 months after authorization of work to begin. Thank you for listening for our presentation today. I'm going to turn it back over to Bob and Agnes.
Thank you, Moses and Matt. I just want to make one or two comments before we turn it over to Agnes, if I may. The deliverables for each of these 7, there's 4 tasks in phase 1, 3 tasks in phase 2. Each one essentially ends up with some kind of technical memo or report of some sort, as well as a presentation. I think 6 of the 7 items, this group would make a presentation to the climate committee, and 1 would be more Agnes and myself making a presentation to the climate committee and the city council, and possibly the planning commission. So I just want to make that clear. Also, phase 1 and 2, if we could do it concurrently, or the more concurrently we can do it, the better. So it's kind of within the same, mostly 18 months. However, it really depends on the timing of the non-competitive local coastal program grant from the California Coastal Commission. We feel we have very high confidence that we will receive the grant. The question is when. Once we receive the grant, we can go back to council if necessary and authorize that work to the consultants so they can get going. But if we could get that sooner rather than later, then a lot of this, or quite a bit of this work can be done concurrently and save time in the long run. So with that, I'll turn that over to Agnes for any concluding remarks.
Well, since you mentioned the grant, I will mention that it is available for us to apply at any time. So it's also dependent on how quickly we apply for it. So, but with a good scope of work, then once we have a solid scope of work, I think we can start the work of applying for that grant as well. And now we're just really looking for feedback from the committee on the scope of work. You know, if it sounds like what you were looking for, or if you feel like there's anything missing. The idea here is once we get feedback from the committee, if it's not too extensive, we would incorporate those comments and then go incorporate those comments into the contract with these 3 firms and go to City Council for approval. So anybody has any comments, questions?
Thank you, Agnes. Before we go out to the committee, can I ask a favor? Bob, could you email the presentation to all of the committee members? There were a couple of slides in there that I would sort of be interested in having as a reference. And I don't need it like really right now, but sometime before the end of the day, would you mind doing that? And I'm sorry, I don't know which consultant owns the slide deck, but I hope that that's okay.
Right, we will get that done.
Thank you. So Lynette? Oh, any members of the, would any members of the public like to comment on this item before we sort of start? Jay and Laura, I see. Okay, Lynette, you want to have a go?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering on page 2 of the document that we received, memorandum to Agnes and Bob. The top of that page says, we assume that the city will provide necessary city data and support on data collection efforts with other entities. Could I have a better understanding of exactly what that means and who and what departments or what individuals would be responsible for this collaboration? And do we have that level of resources available?
You want to start that on this, or maybe I can start that. Sure, I'll start that. In the staff report, it did say about some of the reports that we've already provided to the consultants to get started on their proposal. That's on the top of page 3 under draft proposal development process. So they have that. They've kind of the cursory review of those studies. There's more that are out there, so we're not done. But we felt that those are the meaty ones. The GIS files, we don't have CAD in Carmel. We do have GIS files, Geographic Information Systems. Agnes is our GIS expert, so she would provide all the whatever shape files or whatever they call it, provide that to our consultants. And what else do we have to share with them, Agnes?
Any past reports, I think that's what you guys would be looking for. Is there anything else that you think the city would provide that we haven't already?
I think there are a couple things, and yes, off the top of my head that I can think of. There may be some historic beach profiles surveys that were taken. I'm not sure if the city has access to those. Some of those might have been academic studies, and so maybe outside the city, I'm not sure, but that's something that would be extremely valuable. Historical photographs too of past El Nino winter events or major erosion events that have occurred in the past, whether the city has those or others that we can collect and potentially share in reports. That would be really helpful.
We were going to say, yeah, actually I went to this climate committee about a year and a half ago. There was like some prior storms, and we have quite a bit of good photographic documentation, photograph wise. But I think there's a couple of reports. So we'll scour. We'll look at. I shouldn't use the word scour with a geotechnical engineer, but we'll look for everything that we have and provide copies of everything we have to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. And also in terms of identifying assets that may be affected. Sometimes those aren't always in GIS files, but some help in identifying locations of specific assets that there may not be a spatial file for, or utilities, things of that type of nature. Even if they're in PDF, any type of form we can use, that's usually really helpful.
And any plans you may have for your backshore armoring structures would be helpful for me in my evaluation.
Yeah, just whether that's as-built, right, Moses? Whatever that may be.
Yeah.
We can't, like I said before, when we were negotiating, we don't have everything. We can't promise everything, but everything we do have or can get our hands on, we will provide.
I understand. We're used to working with very little information. The case with most coastal armoring structures.
All right.
So.
Then the second part of my question goes to the comment that Agnes made about the grant availability and when we can get the grant written. Assuming that we move forward and the city council goes forward with the agreement, what does it look like might be a reasonable time frame for getting the grant application, and who is responsible for doing that?
I'm guessing that will probably be me, since I will be the project manager for this project. And I will work with our consultants to get the data together to put the grant application together. So,
do we have a sense for the timeline, Agnes?
It's not a super complicated grant application, so I can't really give you hard numbers, but I would think once we have approval from council, we could probably turn it around in probably about a month or a month and a half.
I'd probably get it word from them within a few months.
Right.
Typically, right. Okay.
So we could be looking sometime in the first quarter of next year.
Hopefully.
Yeah, if it goes to council in October.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Michael?
I just had a couple of quick comments. First, I just want to say this is really something that we really need. I don't know of any comprehensive approach to studying the beach this way that's really ever been done. And with climate, with sea level rise, this is something we really need to do. And I'm just happy that seems like the money's going to be available. And I'm really impressed with the expertise that in your presentation and the focus of it and how you're putting it together. I think we're really going to come up with some valuable data that we can use for adaptation to sea level rise and also storms. And I was going to say that there's a lot of good photographic documentation of the El Nino storms that happened in the 90s.
Right.
Those, from my experience, I've lived in the city about a little over 40 years. Those are the biggest storms that I can remember. And they were big. I mean, you just don't see things like that very often. When you do, it's pretty amazing. And the level, there was a lot of damage. All of the access to the beaches were washed away. And there was, a lot of erosion. And so that data, I'm sure, can be very helpful to you, photographic data, so you can, take a look at that. And I'm sure the city has that, and we'll provide that to you. So those are just my comments.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Well, it's great to see, to be at this point. Really appreciate seeing the visibility through the phase 2 adaptive pathway and LCP policy option steps, even though I know we don't have the funding quite locked down, but that sounds very encouraging as well. So excited to be at this spot. The question I had was around just trying to get a better understanding at the point of phase 2, once we have the adaptation pathway development, and how much further do we have to go, or what's left to get to the comprehensive LCP policy update that's in phase 3? Do we have most of the technical and content to do that, or is there more that has to happen in phase 3 to get us there?
Good question. Matt, can you answer that?
Well, I really wish that Polaris would be here. She's really the LCP expert at the table. Unfortunately, she's not here. Dave as well, also at a conference. What I can say is, I think, given the level of detail that we're going to provide in terms of the coastal hazard modeling and vulnerability assessment, it'll meet requirements for LCP. So this sort of mirrors a lot of other similar assessments we've done for LCP. So that I can say, but as for the specifics, I can only speculate.
We can also check with Polaris, but she's available probably next week, and let the committee know what we find out.
Great. And one other thought, if possible, I don't know if there's, I guess, let me back up. I'm trying to get a better picture of the end goal, and I'm not that steeped in this space. So I think any examples of where it might be one of your projects, Santa Cruz or Marina, where we can kind of see what that endpoint looks like in terms of the policy that we could benchmark against, I think would be helpful. It doesn't have to be one of your projects. It could be a different one, but with your experience, if you're able to point us to example projects where they got it all the way to the LCP and basically had from the city perspective, their long-term obligations and liabilities well-defined and understood, that endpoint, at least for me, would be helpful. And so any pointers on that would be much appreciated.
For sure. We can follow up with you in that. We have a lot of examples in that regard.
Great. Thank you very much.
Carrie, anything?
I had the same question Lynette had in terms of when I looked things over. I'm really looking forward to it's great that, thank you to Bob and Agnes for getting all this together and putting a good team together to take a look at this. So I'm glad we're progressing along. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. I have a few questions. To start, I share Scott's, and I don't want to call it apprehension, but I share his sort of wonderment at what the end goal is. And so to rephrase Scott's question, the LCP amendments are not part of phase 2. So there's an LCP line that says recommendations for LCP updates. How does that differ from, is the thing that's missing the task of winnowing down the recommendations to the final LCP updates? What's missing there to prevent us from getting to where I think Scott and I would like us to get to? Don't everybody answer at once.
Yeah, I don't know if Matt wants to answer that one, but I think the LCP recommendations are that they're recommendations. There needs to be, I believe, a public process, et cetera, to go from recommendations to an actual LCP amendment.
So we would, sorry.
Yeah. go ahead.
So by the end of this process, so by the end of phase 2, task 3, we would have sort of, the city would have in its hands a sort of list of LCP, recommendations. And then it would be up to the city to sort of guide that through the LCP modification process. Okay, so going back to some of the work that you guys have done in the past, and I'm just pulling one of the projects out of your presentation. How long did it take, like when you did the West Shore plan in Santa Cruz, if this project's trajectory goes along as that one did, how long can we expect it to take from, this point or the inception of the project to those LCP amendments? I know we're talking about more than the 18 months that we have here. That seems pretty fast. What can we realistically expect the city to be able to do?
So I guess I can speak to that. I'm not sure the West Cliff Drive example is perfect in this case. That was a Caltrans funded project. It wasn't an LCP related project, but
okay.
Just for example, that was an extensive study, and it was about 2 years, kind of beginning to end, and the city is continuing to work on that. For the LCP process, oftentimes the vulnerability assessments and adaptation planning process is about in line with what we have proposed here with the city, but pushing a full LCP amendment through as it goes through the process of the Coastal Commission and the city and the various back and forth and all the various planning that's involved there, that can take years, and it really is very community dependent on how fast that can take. For instance, we started a project in Marina, I believe 4 years ago, and that process is still ongoing with their update to their LCP. So it can actually take quite a while.
Is that process in Marina? So I'm not sure we're all, particularly familiar with the infrastructure in Marina, but does that process in Marina have to do with the sand dunes and the roads? Is there built infrastructure that's involved in that LCP amendment too, as well? Like, obviously we have a lot of built infrastructure here. I would imagine more than what's in Marina, but I'm not sure to that. And so that's sort of my question.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, you're right. There can be added complexities, I guess, but every case is unique. The city Marina does have some built infrastructure there. If you've been down there, there's the state park, obviously, but there's a hotel there really close to the dunes.
Right.
And we've been talking with that hotel and some other public property and private properties. There's also sort of the sand mine up there too, which is a whole different case. But you can imagine it's all unique kind of situation. We worked on LCP updates down in the city of Carpinteria, which is a highly developed shoreline, maybe kind of similar in certain respects to what you get in Carmel. Obviously, it's Southern California, a very different type of environment, but once again, though, highly developed. And that process for LCP update, it was about 3 years or so. I'm speculating Dave would be the one to get pinned down kind of exact timelines.
Okay. So I'm going to ask this next question, and I'm going to be looking at Michael LePage for his help with this. One of the things that concerns me is that our infrastructure on the beach, the private and public infrastructure along Scenic and along the bluffs and all that is pretty well developed. And I'm a little concerned. So if I look at this project and we have sort of phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3, and so the LCP amendment process starts after we finish phase 3, let's just make that simplifying assumption. I'm a little concerned that when we get to the beginning of phase 3, we will not have done enough public outreach in phases 1 and 2 so that the public, and by public, I mean the city council and the planning commission and the public, sort of understand the building blocks that we've put in place to move forward. Like when I look at the meeting schedule, what I see are climate committee meetings, but I don't see planning commission and city council meetings and public outreach meetings. And I don't honestly know whether that's important. So that's my question. Like, I don't know, so for example, this presentation you gave today, which was a great presentation, do we need to give that as sort of a building block presentation to the city council and the planning commission? And should the reports these 4 reports that you do in phase 1, to this committee, should those also be given to, say, the planning commission, and it could obviously be in some sort of joint meeting format, or however it is we do that, so that we bring the planning commission along while we do this work. And I kind of like to hear from, I don't know, sorry, Michael, to put you on the spot. How important do the consultants and Michael and Carrie, do you think that my concern is?
Well, with the planning commission, we typically make recommendations to council about policy. And of course, we approve the coastal development permits. So if there were adaptations which involve coastal armoring or work that's going to be done to particular structures down at the beach that we already have now, I would assume that, any coastal development permits would come before the planning commission for approval. And obviously, anytime there's a meeting, the public has an opportunity for input. So that typically is how the planning commission, is involved in any of these types of processes. I mean, the public, with the public, a lot of it has to do with their level of interest in a particular project. For right now, we've got this proposed wireless ordinance change, and there's a lot of interest in that. And but there's some other things that have come up, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of interest at all. And with climate change and this committee, it's kind of been the same people the whole time, and I would really like to see a broader engagement from the community than we have seen. I mean, and how we make that happen, I'm not sure. It may take a climate change event to try to get people really, activated about this and start paying closer attention. But having said that, what we're doing here as a community, as a committee, what the city is doing, hiring these consultants, this is exactly what we should be doing, so that we collect the data, these specialists do their analysis, and then they make recommendations. And it seems like they have the experience to do this. They're doing this up and down the coast, and so this is the way to do it.
If I can comment on this as well, this issue about advancing the public outreach earlier on absolutely came up in our prior negotiations. We talked about doing it from day one. The group as a whole felt that phase 1 is really just the initial technical information. Until then, we don't have much to report, quite frankly. Yes, we will be developing information and getting the word out, but we kind of felt that doing public outreach prior to the completion of phase 1 might be premature. In fact, at one point, the outreach started in phase 3. We did push it forward into phase 2. We kind of felt that would be more of a middle ground. But again, we have to keep it within budget. So one of the proposals we saw was quite a bit over budget. We just simply don't have the funding for that. So we kind of have to, fit as much information and services as we can within the available budget. Now, it's not to say that the proposal doesn't identify what presentations that myself or Agnes or Evan or anybody else would be presenting to Planning Commission or the City Council, possibly in the Forest and Beach Commission. So there'd be additional outreach through the commissions and possibly additional public meetings. But we felt that until we get to somewhere well into near the end of phase 1 and middle of phase 2, might be premature to start really meeting with the public and having a lot of maps and graphs and information to provide. So that's kind of how it ended up the way it is.
Lynette?
I really like that approach that Bob just suggested. I think that weaving this endeavor into the other commissions, planning and Forest and Beach especially. And I feel that because we as a committee gave some effort to trying to decide who should own some of these things and who should be trying to put a stake in the ground that it was their responsibility to assure that some of these initiatives went forward. And it's my feeling that while I totally respect the budgetary limitations and understand those, I'm just thrilled we have what we have. And I do feel that what Bob is suggesting about his or Agnes's presentations to these other groups and maybe even to various constituencies in the public is really important as we go along. As soon as we have something that's meaningful, right, that engagement really is so important for what we do go forward. And I know that public engagement has always been a challenge. I know we have the same, we round up the same people and we always hear from the same people, but I feel like our efforts to be sure that our commissions are fully informed and really have opportunities for feedback is a great idea. And Bob, I like that approach. I really hope that's what we do. And keep with the engagement of the consultants on the track that you have suggested. And I like the idea of joint meetings. If we invited Forest and Beach and Planning Commission to hear some of our, specifically, not just kind of the general broadcast of we're having a meeting, but those commissions specifically to participate with us in some of these consultant presentations, I think that would go a long way to getting the most we can out of the budget we have.
So let me ask a favor then. My request would be one, that, the staff report is good and describes, so when I look at the staff report, you describe the consultant selection process and the draft proposal development process and the scope of our outline and the fee and budget. And I think what I would like to see in the staff report that's presented to the city council is a more specific public outreach process. And that would be for both the public at large and the commissions, like how specifically, and I tell you, I'm not going to exactly hold your feet to the fire, probably, but I would say that I would like to know how the Planning Commission and the Forest and Beach Commission are going to be involved in these things. And what you said to me, Bob, earlier about not including them sort of in phase one, but more including them in phase two, I might be okay with that. But I would like to really understand, either not necessarily at this commission meeting, but when it comes up to the council, what the plan is to involve everybody. And I would like to, I feel strongly enough about this that I would like the council to buy into what the public engagement process is for, for that. And, I heard you talk about the budget before, and that's fine. That's a very valid concern. If it costs $10,000 more to do a more robust public engagement process, then maybe we should consider doing that. So that's, I don't know what the answer to that question is, but I would ask you to sort of think about it and write it up. And then this is a lot of money. I understand that this is written up, that we've allocated this money in the capital improvement project budget. I'm not sure I see smooth sailing through the council. So just because of the amount of money. So I don't know, whether an item like this would be on the consent agenda at the council, or whether you and Agnes would do a version of the presentation that you did for Carrie and I, for this committee, to Carrie and I, assuming Carrie's still on the council, assuming you get it done by, and me too for that matter, by the beginning of November. So maybe a fuller presentation is warranted rather than a consent agenda presentation.
That was our orders of business for this one.
Yeah, I think there's some stuff here that maybe the council should talk about. And let's see.
Jeff.
And the only comment, hold on one second. And the only comment I would make about the thing that is sort of tangentially interesting to me, Bob, also, is what has Pebble Beach done with respect to climate change and the golf course? So I know that, they obviously exist on the same, they're part of the same Carmel Cove that we are. And are they just going to let the beach drown? They have a lot of that is, a lot of the course is sort of newly, i.e. in the past 20 years, armored. But I don't know what their agreements with the Coastal Commission are, if anything, with respect to what's going to happen to, I think it's the 10th hole, Carrie would probably know, what's going to happen to the 10th hole of the golf course. So it would be interesting to know how that road has been traveled with respect to the 10th hole specifically, but also the other holes. Obviously, the 10th hole sits on a beach, and I don't think most of the other ones do. Maybe Stillwater Cove, in fact, obviously sits on a beach too. So there may have been some work done there. And that would be, I think that would be really informative. So sorry, Lynette.
Thank you. I wanted to go to your prior comment, Jeff, about being more specific with the city council. And since this is capital improvement project approved funding, where and in what way do you see the council either being sensitive to certain elements of this project or withdrawing their support? I'm not sure I understand exactly where you think that might be going. I'm all for getting more information, as you know, I love that. But I'm wondering what you see as the trip points.
There are two things that I would see, and Carrie can comment too. There's been in the past some tripping over some of the money that's been allocated to climate change efforts, and even though this money is allocated, the fact is that this $250 or $275, $150 or $175,000, $175, or $275. It will come to the council as a contract, because those things come to the council as contracts. Right. And so any council member can pull something off the consent agenda and can start quizzing staff about it. And so part of my comments here are related to let's just be ready for that to happen. And I would rather, if we're pretty sure that's going to happen, and I think there's a good chance it would happen, then I think that we should just be prepared and just go in with a presentation at the beginning, rather than sort of backstep. In the past, when this has happened, we've been delayed by a month or 2 months as the council agendas get reformulated and moved around and whatever. So I think it's better to just go in ready and just deal with that at the beginning. And the other thing was, I always think education is good. And I understand that this would take up 45 minutes of the council's time, and that time is precious. But this is this has the potential to be a sort of a politically charged project down the road. And so I think that getting the council's fingerprints on it from the very beginning, when we don't really know what the outcome is, but instead we're laying out a path or a process to get to the outcome. I think getting buy-in to that process will give us credibility. I don't know how much, but will give us some sort of credibility when we get to the end. I think that's important. It's important to have credibility and to get the council's buy-in and the public's buy-in. And I think that that's a way to do that. So those are the things that go through my head when I make that request.
Well, I think that's why it's important, as Bob said, that it's more of an order of business, so that it's not on consent. And so the rest of the council can get a sense of the enormity of the project and the impact. I do like the idea of going to Pebble Beach and seeing what they've done or have not done. I don't know if they've done much. I think we talked to the person over at Pebble Beach, and he said they haven't really done anything yet. So, there's the 10th hole, the ninth and 10th hole that are, just north of Carmel Beach, are in the same, they're cliffs like we have. So it's very similar. It would be interesting to see how they're going to address impacts to that part of the coastline for their very important golf course. But I do like the idea of helping people go through this process to understand the impacts of it. So the more the merrier. And it would be nice to do it by November because I'm going to be there. We know that we have, support with other people on the council, but.
Yeah, I think I echo Carrie's November comment. Yes, I think that's important.
So is it possible to get it, you think, Bob and Anez, we can get it on October or November?
I think we have some homework to do to get it in October because the reports are already due next week. We still have some fine tuning to do with our consultants. So let's not rule it out, but I think November is probably more realistic. It is realistic.
Okay, good.
I'll have our ducks in a row. Yeah, it was always intended to be orders of business. This is not routine business. We know that.
Yeah, and I know we've got a couple of big topics for October. Right. So it looks like November would be good,
most appropriate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thank you.
Michael, you look like you were had something to add.
Well, the only thing I was going to say was that with the talk about Pebble Beach and realizing it's all part of Carmel Bay, that any recommendations that the specialists make should, take that into consideration, even if it isn't within the geographic scope of their study and their work. But recommendations, I think need to be made in the total context of the environment that exists, even if it isn't within the boundaries of our municipality. That's the only thing I was going to say.
Yeah, I wonder, to Michael's comment, Bob, I wonder if we should try to sort of minimally engage Pebble Beach and at least let them know at a minimum sort of what we're getting ready to do. I don't know if they would be interested in being a part of it or if they would be interested in funding a part of it. Obviously, it affects them. Maybe it affects them. That remains to be seen. But it might be worth having sort of a staff conversation with them and sort of gauging whatever it is that they're thinking, and maybe they're not interested or thinking anything at all. But that might be a worthwhile effort.
We did discuss this with the team. There is economy of scale also. If we were to do one joint project, we both Pebble Beach and the city can probably save money in the long run if we were to do it together. Of course, the schedule will change and all that kind of stuff, and we probably wouldn't make the November meeting. But there's a benefit in the long run if we could do a larger joint project. We're not there yet. I do believe there was an initial call or two, Pebble Beach Community Services District, but I'm fuzzy on where that ended up. But we have more homework to do. We need to follow up and revisit that certainly before we take anything to council.
Any further? So are you comfortable then, Bob and Agnes, are you comfortable just taking the comments that we gave? I don't really hear any objections to any of them, and incorporating them into something and then just bringing that to the council rather than this committee?
Yep.
And you will send us, I made this request before, but you'll send us the presentation and
get you the slides as soon as possible. Yeah. And once we find out about the LCP from Polaris at EMC, we'll get you that, answer that question or two as well.
Okay. If there are no more comments, thank you all. We'll move on to the last item on the agenda, which is future agenda items. And if we don't have anything there, I guess we will convene when Agnes tells us we have something to talk about. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.